Keir Starmer, you've come to Stoke today, a place where Labour lost 2 seats in the last general election. You've been spending some time talking to students. Have they given you a better idea about how you win back Stoke in the next election?
Yes, and it's really good to have been able to talk to them. The first thing is they think it's very important that I'm in Stoke. They want the discussion about Stoke to be here, not in London and elsewhere. And that's why this is the latest in a series of visits that I've done all summer. I've been in different places across the country all summer, usually for 2 or 3 days at a time, actually investing time, putting some ideas on the table and talking about them, but in particular talking to people who don't vote Labour. One thing I was really struck with today, because I was talking to young people, these are 16, 17, a couple of 18-year-olds, and I was saying, what's the biggest issue for you in Stoke? And they said it's safety and security on the streets, and they're worried about antisocial behaviour, about drugs, and the fact that they don't see enough police officers. And they openly referenced that the police station had been shut down. Now, quite often, I think we think that sort of law and order issue, safety issue, is something which perhaps is more acute with the older generation. But actually, for young people here, a couple of young women were saying to me, I don't go into the high street, and I certainly wouldn't go into the high street sort of after hours. Really, really struck me as something that profoundly needs change.
Okay, well, in that classroom after you left, I hope you don't mind, but I asked them what they thought of you.
I thought you would.
Yeah, doing my job. And the consensus in the room was that they liked you, they thought you were nice, but they didn't think you were a leader.
Well, they're wrong about that. My job is to lead my party, which I've obviously been doing, changing the party, but also to lead the country. And leaders come in different shapes and sizes. And the most important thing about a leader is, what is that leader going to do? What is that leader going to change? And in the end, we were with those students for the best part of an hour and a half after you spoke to them. And we talked about the jobs that they want to see in Stoke. I was really struck that when I asked them, how many of you think you're going to have to leave Stoke to get the job that you want? Many of them put their hand up, pretty well all of them put their hand up. So they were very interested in that question of what are the jobs of the future. As I've said, what is the position in relation to policing and crime? Very acutely aware of the climate crisis. And we were having a really strong discussion about that. And what they wanted to hear from me, what I was saying to them is, we're going to do this in relation to jobs. We are going to end insecure jobs, low-paid jobs, invest in the future with a 10-year strategy, develop on health and social care and mental health they were particularly concerned about, and on education and the sense they want a broader approach to life.
But in your summer of learning, and we'll come on to that, has that sometimes been the feedback that you've got, that people like you, you're personable, but they don't really see what you stand for, they don't see you as a leader? Do you think there's something there? Is there a nub in there where you have to do better?
Well, let me tell you, we've been doing this for now, I don't know how many weeks, in different parts of the country, lots of conversations, in the workplace, in factories, in schools, in colleges, in community centres, in a bingo hall. I've been just about everywhere. 3 big things come out of that, and they're not actually what you said. The 3 big things are that Boris Johnson's wearing a bit thin. People realise that he's all slogan and no substance. That's the first thing. The second thing is they really want change. When I asked them and we talked about what the future looks like, including today with the students here, they want change. They desperately, frustratingly want change. They can see a better future out there and they want us to get to that better future. When we talked about me and the Labour Party, what I was struck by was they were open to voting Labour. And remember, I've been trying to talk to people who don't vote Labour. Many Labour leaders go around the country wanting to talk to people who already support the Labour Party. I asked to be talking all summer to people who don't vote Labour. And they said to me, we're open to it. One woman said to me, I want to vote Labour again, but you now have to persuade me. You have to show me what the Labour Party is going to do. Now, given that we lost as badly as we did back in 2019, to have the position now where people say, well, I'm open to it, I'm not closed to the idea, that is a really important step in the right direction. Obviously, what that means for me and the Labour Party is that We need to use this autumn, now as we come out of the pandemic, to set out what that future looks like, so that we can earn their vote in the next general election.
Okay, well let's move on. Let's move on to policy after your summer of listening. I mean, this week a huge policy, a potentially election-defining policy from the Prime Minister. He broke a manifesto promise. He has a huge tax hike. He still got it through the Commons with just 5 rebels. I mean, he's run rings around you this week, hasn't he?
Well, what he's done this week is introduce a massive tax hike for working people without meeting the key tests of what genuinely changing social care and health would mean. So I think the 3 most important questions are, in relation to the Prime Minister's own approach, will his plan mean that people who need care, and particularly going into care homes, don't have to sell their houses, their homes? And the answer to that is yes, they still will have to sell their homes. If you're in Stoke or anywhere else around the country and you've got a house towards your retirement that's worth about £150,000 and perhaps some savings, then you're going to be paying £86,000 towards your care. And the question I put to the Prime Minister yesterday was, let's say someone's got a house of about 150,000 and a bit of savings, and then they get a bill for £86,000. How do they pay that without selling their house? Didn't have an answer, because there isn't an answer. They would have to sell it. The second test is this a plan that will genuinely bring down waiting lists by the time of the next general election? Again, the answer from the Prime Minister is no, it's not going to achieve that. So it doesn't, of the 2 things that he set out to achieve, it's not going to achieve it. The third test is it fair? Because this is an approach that puts all the heavy lifting on working people. And the example I put to the Prime Minister yesterday was a woman called Rosie. She's a care worker, single mum with children. She works in a care home, and she's now getting a double whammy, which is increased national insurance tax burden, and she's going to suffer the withdrawal of universal credit, the uplift. So she's going to have to pay, £1,000 or more. She's going to lose £1,000 or more a year. She wanted more shifts, she's looked around for childcare and she can't get it. She's at her wit's end. And the question for the Prime Minister is, why on earth are you hammering working people?
Yeah, but he has put through manifesto-breaking tax policy. He is promising to save the NHS. He's saying that he is the party of the NHS. He's voted it through. He's put you in a tricky position. Well, he's a canny politician, isn't he?
Well, he has introduced an unfair tax hike for working people, which isn't going to fix social care and isn't going to bring down waiting lists. And let's just address...
But he's also... you can argue that, and in 3 years' time you could be proven right. But in the run-up to that, he has parked his tanks on Labour's lawn. He is the party of the NHS, and you, the Labour Party, voted against a tax hike that gives £36 billion to the NHS, and that will be on every Conservative leaflet at the next election. Labour doesn't back the NHS. He snookered you.
Look, this is a government that, before we went into the pandemic, had underfunded the NHS. Waiting lists were spiralling before the pandemic. How can you be the party of the NHS if waiting lists are spiralling before the pandemic?
Because he's just put through a tax rise to raise £36
before
billion.
Before the pandemic, vacancies across the NHS were a cause of chronic problems. This is a government that's run down the NHS, and that's why I described it as a sticking plaster over a gaping wound that they have created. But look, the central question you put to me is, he's put this money on the table. The problem for the Prime Minister now is delivery. Is he going to be able to go to the next election and say, nobody needs to sell their house in their home for care? No, he's not. He doesn't even say that now, let alone at the election. Is he going to go into the election and say, I've brought down waiting lists, I've cleared the waiting list backlog? No, because he doesn't even say now he can do that. Is he going to go into the election and be able to say, I've actually solved the problems of social care? Because we've talked a lot this week about funding. But the change we need to see in social care is much deeper than that. A third of those in social care are adults with disabilities.
Okay.
There are millions of acts of social care that aren't being done at home. And most people want their care at home, and then you've
But
got
he
the
must
question
have
of the workforce.
Did it surprise you a bit though? This policy, it must have caught you on the hop a bit, no?
Just hear me out. One of the major problems with social care is that we've got an underfunded, undervalued workforce. There's a reason that there's a high turnover in care workers, and that there are huge numbers of vacancies, and that's because it's underpaid and undervalued. And that's why what I think we need to do is to have a preventative approach to social care way before people have to go into care homes, to make sure that the acts of support that are needed in the home, which often if they're not done lead to deterioration, are done. We have a principle that says you should be able to stay at home. Just hear me out on this, stay at home, and that we then put in support for the workforce, professionalise it, bring up the rates of pay and the value that we put in those that are working in the sector. Because if we don't fix those bits, then the argument about whether you have to sell your home is a small part, an important part, but a small part of the overall picture.
But how can you credibly claim to be the party of the NHS when you just voted against a £36 billion tax rise to fund the NHS? You can go into whether what the Tories did in the past, underfund, whatever you want to argue. From this week, that is the message. Boris Johnson is willing to take difficult decisions on taxation in order to better fund.
Decisions, has he?
Well, he has. He broke a manifesto promise.
Well, he's broken manifesto promises left, right, and centre. That is a different matter. But what he had, if the Prime Minister put forward a plan that would genuinely fix social care and that would genuinely bring down waiting lists by the next election, and that was underpinned by fair funding and fair taxation, I would support it. What I won't support is a plan which doesn't fix social care, doesn't scratch the surface of social care, isn't going to bring down the waiting lists. I mean, it's an unfair burden on working people. And
so you're quite relaxed when he says he's the party of the NHS.
It's not the party of the NHS. For 10 years, they've starved the NHS. And, only a few months ago, they were proposing a 1% pay rise for the NHS, which was a pay cut. I'll tell you what, my wife works in the NHS, and I've been in many, many hospitals over the years, and particularly in the last few months. And the idea that anybody working in the NHS thinks that the Tory party is the party of the NHS is ridiculous.
But in 3 years' time, when the NHS has been given an additional £25 billion in funding because he did a tax rise, it might feel more like the Conservative Party's party of the NHS, and you've got a big problem.
Well, the NHS frontline have done an amazing job in the last 18 months dealing with COVID. They're now facing up to the crisis of waiting lists, and what they want is to be able to be clear that that waiting list will be reduced, the backlog will be reduced by the next general election. The Prime Minister is not saying or doing that for them. But the other big issue here is, in terms of how you fund this, there's a huge divide between me and the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister wants a tax hike for working people. He's putting all of the weight on working people. I say it should be on those that have the broadest shoulders. Okay. And the example I put to the Prime Minister yesterday was this. A landlord with several properties doesn't pay a penny more. His or her tenants in work pay more tax in national insurance. Okay. And for working people, particularly those who are going to have a cut in universal credit, this is a huge double whammy.
Okay,
and of all the ways to raise this money, why hammer working people?
I was going to come to it, but you've brought me to it, so let's dig into this. Your response about this has actually irritated quite a lot of people in your party and the public as well, I think, because you criticise the policy, you say what's wrong with it, you very skillfully exploit that at the dispatch box, but you don't actually give voters an alternative. In fact, one of the kids said to me, I know what Keir Starmer stands against. What does he stand for? What's the policy? What does he believe? So what does the broadest shoulders pay there? What does that mean?
Well, what I do with social care is to introduce a preventative principle to make sure that we intervene much earlier on with those million acts of support that are needed before people even need care homes. I would introduce an at-home approach, at home first, which would allow people to stay at home rather than going into care homes by putting the support in for them and supporting them that are caring for them. And I'd put in a package for those working in the care sector so that they're properly valued and properly paid on secure contracts. Yeah. So they are the practical measures which will actually make a difference to social care. When it comes to funding it, I wouldn't look to working people and have a tax hike on them.
I
would say that those with the broadest shoulders should pay. Well, that means that those that earn their money or their income from things other than work should pay their fair share.
The wealth tax.
There's a whole range of things we could look at here. But people who earn their money from property, dividends, stocks, shares, capital gains tax, these should all be looked at as a broader, fairer way of raising taxes.
So in principle you would prefer a wealth tax of some sort?
I think we should look at all of these options, and we shouldn't say that the whole weight has to fall on working people, that the people who earn their living from a wage, why shouldn't those that get their money from other means, whether it's dividends, stocks, shares, property, pay their fair share? And the landlord example is a very important one. Why should a landlord not pay a penny, but the working tenant, because they're earning a wage rather than a rent?
You would prefer wealth taxes than a raise of income tax?
I think we should look across the board at something that is fair, but at the moment,
you would prefer a wealth tax to raise an income tax?
I think we look at a broad range here, but the idea that we don't... The one thing the Prime Minister has said...
Can you just answer that? Do you prefer, in principle, wealth taxes to income tax increases?
I think we need to look at a range of options.
You're not going to answer.
Well, we need to look at a range of options, but that includes the way people earn their money, whether it's from earned wages or whether it's from rent or stocks and dividends. And I think we should look at all that, because in the end it should be the principle that those with the broadest shoulders pay their fair share.
Okay, so just to summarise, national insurance, you think you're anti that because you think it's unfair on working people. Income tax could be looked at, but it seems to me that you think that when you say those with the broader shoulders, you are looking at those with wealth taxes, you are looking at those...
We're looking at precisely the sorts of income that Rachel Reeves identified yesterday, which is income from property, income from dividends, stocks, shares, etc. The income that comes not from your wages, because what the government is doing is putting this all on working people.
So that's not income tax then, is it? That is wealth taxes. Look, I'm trying to pin you down because I actually want you to say yes or no, I think we should look at a wealth tax. It doesn't commit you to the policy. It just says to me that that's your preferred option, and that's very clear, and it's very clear to the public.
Yes, all of those options are a wealth tax. I mean, in the broadest sense of the word, and we should look at it.
Okay. Andy Burnham, of course, he came up with the policy a decade ago. He said in an interview with Sky yesterday that he'd like you to outline your plan at conference. Is that what you intend to do?
Well, I've already set out what I think is wrong with social care, and what I think we need to do about it are, first and foremost, those three things: preventative model, an at-home first principle, and making sure that the workforce is secure, properly rewarded, etc. Yeah. So we actually set that out back in April of this year.
And are you going to say more of it at conference, or do you feel like if you establish the principles, you have time to then decide the policy?
Well, I think the most important thing about a plan is, have you identified what the problems are? And we have. Have you identified the principles for fixing them? And we have. Have you identified the principle for funding? And we have. Obviously, this needs to develop now. We need to look at whatever the government brings forward when it brings forward a white paper. But in terms of the principles that should be applied, I think we've very clearly identified those preventative principle, the care at home principle, and making sure that the workforce is properly rewarded, properly recognised.
Okay, and just finally, Labour Party conference. Last year you had to give your inaugural speech as leader down the camera barrel, which must have been difficult, not in the room, feeding off the audience. That's not an easy thing to do. This year, what's the tenor of the speech. You've had a difficult 6 months.
Yeah.
You lost Hartlepool. You lost your deposit in Amersham and Cheshire. You barely clung on in Batley and Spen. Do you see this conference speech as a sort of relaunch of your leadership? Is it make or break for you?
It's not a relaunch by any shape or means. We've been through, I mean, last year I had to give my conference speech, you say, down the barrel of a camera, really difficult. But we've been through 18 months of a pandemic, and in a pandemic I think that most people are predominantly concerned about their own health, not getting the virus, whether they've got their job or not. This is the first opportunity that I've really got to give the future look. What does Britain look like post-pandemic? What are we going to say about the future of work? What are we going to say about the future of education and skills? What are we going to say about the 10-year plan that we need for the health service that goes way beyond waiting lists and deals with the underlying question of people living for longer and how we use technology to deal with that, and also how do we meet our targets in relation to the climate crisis, and how do we see that as an opportunity? So this is a chance, I think, for me to set out what the future looks like. And again, one of the things I've taken away from all the various discussions I've had over the course of this summer is people desperately want change, and they want to know there's a better future out there, and we're going to set out what that looks like.
And just one more thing. You've been doing this for 5 years or 6 years as a politician, 18 months as leader. You're more experienced as a lawyer, really, than a politician. I think that's fair. You did law for longer than you've been a politician. What do you think you can learn from Boris Johnson as a political leader?
Not very much. I believe, whether it's law or politics, that integrity and honesty matter. And he and I are very different in relation to that. And leaders come in different shapes and different sizes, but I think that it's very important that people see who I am. Yes, I came to politics late. Yes, I did other things. I ran a public service. I know what it means to actually make change on a national scale. I know what it means to be held accountable. I know what it means to work with other people to bring about real change. And I bring that to politics. And so I'm not much interested in shouting and screaming about a problem. I want to know what is the problem, how are we going to fix it, and that's the sort of politician I am.
He has approval ratings of -23 and yours are -39, so whatever he does, the public seem to like it more than they like you.
Those pollings go like this over the months and over the years, as you know. One time Boris Johnson's here, then he's here, I'm there. The only poll that matters is the poll at the next general election, and that is what we are working to. That is what we're utterly focused on, and everything I'm doing is guided by the question, does this improve our chance of winning the next general election? And I'm determined that we will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.